The morning sun filtered through the large glass windows of Brewhaven, casting warm golden streaks across the polished wooden tables inside. It was one of those rare days where autumn hadn't quite given way to winter, and the air carried just enough crispness to make coffee taste better. The cafe buzzed with its usual mix of patrons, students typing furiously on laptops, couples sharing whispered conversations over lats, and freelancers glued to their phones as they scrolled through endless feeds. At a corner table near the window sat Mark Reynolds. He wasn't hard to notice, even amidst the crowd. His weathered face bore the marks of years spent outdoors, lines etched by wind, sun, and countless sleepless nights under foreign skies. Today, he wore his favorite camouflage jacket, faded but meticulously cared for. Patches adorned the sleeves and chest, each one representing a different chapter of his life. Deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places too classified to name. Some were humorous, a grinning skull with crossed rifles, others somber, like the black ribbon dedicated to a fallen comrade named Jake. To Mark, this jacket wasn't just clothing. It was armor against the ghosts that haunted him, the memories of battles fought, friends lost, and promises broken. Every stitch told a story, every patch held weight. On days when the world felt overwhelming, slipping it on reminded him of who he used to be, strong, capable, unshakable. Now, at 42, retired from an elite Special Forces unit, he often wondered if he'd ever feel that way again. Mark sipped his black coffee, staring out the window at the bustling street beyond. People hurried past, oblivious to the quiet man nursing his drink. Outside, life moved forward at breakneck speed. Cars honking, kids laughing, dogs barking. Inside, Mark existed in a bubble of stillness, insulated by the hum of conversation and the occasional whir of the espresso machine. For once, he allowed himself to relax, letting the warmth of the cafe envelop him like a cocoon. But peace rarely lasts long. Karen Thompson entered Brewhaven with all the subtlety of a hurricane. Her presence demanded attention, not because she was particularly striking, though her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer jeans certainly turned heads, but because of the energy she exuded. She radiated confidence, bordering on arrogance, as though she were perpetually auditioning for some invisible audience. Karen's phone was clutched tightly in her hand, ready to capture whatever drama might unfold. After all, drama was her currency. She spotted an empty seat at the counter and slid onto the stool, ordering a caramel macchiato with extra foam. While waiting, her sharp eyes scanned the room, cataloging details most people would overlook. That's when she noticed him. Mark sat hunched slightly over his mug, his posture relaxed yet alert, a soldier's default stance. Even in civilian life, the camo jacket caught her eye first. To Karen, it screamed, "Try hard," a desperate attempt to cling to glory days long gone. She wrinkled her nose in distaste. Why would anyone wear something so garish in public? And why here, of all places? This wasn't a military base or a parade. It was a trendy coffee shop catering to influencers and creatives. Camouflage had no place here. Her irritation grew as she studied him further. There was something about the way he carried himself, calm, almost serene, that irked her. Who did he think he was, parading around like some kind of hero? Did he honestly believe anyone cared? Before Karen could stop herself, she stood up, foam in hand, and marched toward his table. Her heels clicked sharply against the tiled floor, drawing curious glances from nearby patrons. Mark didn't look up until she planted herself squarely in front of him, arms crossed. "Excuse me," Karen began, her voice loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter. "Do you mind explaining why you're wearing that thing?" Mark blinked, startled by the intrusion. He set his mug down slowly, meeting her gaze with polite confusion. "That thing," he repeated, gesturing to his jacket. "It's my jacket." "I see that," Karen snapped, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "What, do you really think it's appropriate to wear camouflage in a place like this? You're not in the military anymore. It's disrespectful." Mark frowned, leaning back in his chair. "Disrespectful? How exactly is wearing my own jacket disrespectful?" "It's mockery," Karen declared, throwing her hands up for emphasis. "You're pretending to be something you're not. Real soldiers don't walk around flaunting their uniforms like costumes. They earn them." A muscle in Mark's jaw twitched. "I am a real soldier," he said evenly, keeping his voice low despite the rising tension. "This jacket means more to me than you'll ever understand." "Oh, please." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Save the sob story. I bet you bought that jacket online last week to feel important." Newsflash, playing dress-up doesn't make you brave. The accusation hit Mark like a punch to the gut. Memories surged unbidden, sleepless nights in foxholes, the deafening roar of explosions, the faces of men he'd watched die. He clenched his fists beneath the table, forcing himself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help anything. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said finally, his tone icy. This jacket represents years of service, sacrifice, and loss. If you can't respect that, maybe you should leave. But Karen wasn't done. Far from it. Emboldened by the growing number of onlookers, she leaned in closer, her voice rising to match her indignation. Respect. Don't lecture me about respect. You're the one parading around like some wanted Rambo. Take off the jacket or admit you're just another poser trying to live vicariously through someone else's bravery. Her words hung heavy in the air, sharp and cutting. Mark stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something, anything, to defend himself. Instead, he simply shook his head and looked away, unwilling to engage further. Unfortunately, Karen misinterpreted his silence as weakness. With a triumphant smirk, she whipped out her phone and snapped a photo of him, capturing the moment mid-confrontation. Before Mark could protest, she was already typing out a caption, "When pretend soldiers play dress-up. Hashtag accountability, hashtag respect our troops." By the time she hit post, the damage was done. Within minutes, the photo went viral. Social media erupted with outrage, dividing users into two camps: those who sided with Karen, praising her for calling out fall patriotism, and those who rallied behind Mark, defending his right to honor his service however he chose. Comments flooded in, ranging from supportive messages to venomous attacks. For Karen, the backlash only fueled her ego. She appeared on local news segments, doubling down on her stance and painting herself as a crusader for authenticity. Clips of her interviews circulated widely, each one more self-righteous than the last. She basked in the attention, reveling in her newfound status as a champion of truth-tellers everywhere. Meanwhile, Mark retreated further into himself. The confrontation replayed in his mind endlessly, each word carving deeper wounds. He couldn't shake the image of Karen smirking as she took his picture, reducing years of sacrifice to a cheap headline. Worse still were the comments flooding his social media accounts, people questioning his legitimacy, accusing him of lying, mocking his pain. As the days passed, Mark found it harder to leave the house. The jacket, once a source of comfort, now felt like a target painted on his back, yet he refused to take it off. Doing so would feel like surrendering, not just to Karen, but to everyone who doubted him. Little did either of them know, their clash had awakened forces far greater than either could imagine. Forces that wouldn't tolerate disrespect lightly. And soon, Karen would learn just how wrong she'd been. The days following the incident at Brewhaven felt like an unrelenting storm for Mark Reynolds. What had started as a quiet morning sipping coffee turned into a whirlwind of public scrutiny, ridicule, and soul-crushing reminders of everything he tried to leave behind. Each notification on his phone was another blow, a barrage of comments, shares, and messages dissecting his life, reducing him to a caricature of himself: fake soldier, attention seeker, pathetic. The words blurred together in a haze of vitriol, yet each one pierced deeper than the last. At first, Mark ignored it. He deleted the social media apps from his phone, hoping to silence the noise. But the world outside wasn't so easily escaped. Friends stopped by his motorcycle repair shop less frequently, their eyes avoiding his when they did. Neighbors whispered behind his back, their once friendly greetings replaced with awkward nods. Even strangers recognized him now, thanks to Karen's viral post. Some offered condolences or support, but most stared judgmentally, as if expecting him to justify himself. The isolation gnawed at him. Nights became unbearable. Sleep eluded him, replaced by vivid flashbacks triggered by the simplest things: a car backfiring in the distance, the sound of boots on pavement, even the scent of burnt coffee. Memories flooded back unbidden, the acrid stench of gunpowder, the metallic tang of blood, the gut-wrenching cries of comrades dying in his arms. Each flashback dragged him further away from the present, pulling him back into the chaos of war. He found himself sitting alone in his dimly lit garage late at night, clutching his jacket tightly. The patches seemed to stare back at him, accusing him of failing to protect them, their stories, their sacrifices. He traced the black ribbon honoring Jake, his best friend who hadn't made it home alive. They'd promised each other they'd always come back. Mark had broken that promise, and now he couldn't even defend Jake's memory without being called a fraud. One particularly sleepless night, Mark poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did anymore, and sat in front of his laptop. Against his better judgment, he typed his name into the search bar. The results were devastating. Thousands of posts mocked him, dissected his appearance, and questioned his legitimacy. Memes featuring his photos circulated widely, captioned with cruel jokes about wanted soldiers and mall ninjas. Worst of all were the conspiracy theories claiming he'd stolen medals or fabricated his service entirely. The lies spread faster than anyone could debunk them. Mark closed the laptop abruptly, slamming it shut as if doing so might erase what he'd seen. His hands trembled around the glass, and he drained the rest of the whiskey in one bitter gulp. For the first time in years, tears welled up in his eyes, not out of self-pity, but out of sheer exhaustion. How could people be so cruel? Didn't they realize how much this hurt? Not just him, but every veteran who wore their uniform with pride. While Mark wrestled with his demons, Karen Thompson reveled in her newfound fame. Her social media followers skyrocketed overnight, doubling within hours of posting the infamous photo. Brands reached out, eager to collaborate with the bold influencer who dared to challenge fall patriotism. She booked appearances on podcasts, talk shows, and local news segments, where she repeated her narrative with practiced precision. "I'm not saying veterans don't deserve respect," Karen would say, flashing her trademark confident smile. "But there's a difference between respecting our troops and glorifying war. People need to understand that wearing a military uniform isn't a fashion statement. It's a symbol of sacrifice. If you haven't earned it, you shouldn't wear it." Her arguments resonated with many, especially those unfamiliar with military culture. Supporters praised her bravery, calling her a voice of reason in a world obsessed with performative activism. Critics accused her of overstepping, pointing out the hypocrisy of profiting off controversy while claiming moral high ground. But Karen didn't care. As long as the spotlight stayed on her, she was winning. Behind closed doors, however, cracks began to show. Late at night, after the camera stopped rolling and the applause faded, Karen scrolled through her notifications obsessively. At first, the overwhelming support thrilled her. But soon, darker messages started appearing, cryptic warnings that sent shivers down her spine. "You've disrespected someone who gave everything for your freedom. Are you ready for the consequences? Veterans have brothers and sisters who look out for them. Good luck sleeping tonight. These aren't costumes. These are lives. Watch your step." Karen dismissed them as trolls at first, brushing them aside with a roll of her eyes. But as the messages grew more frequent and more menacing, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One evening, she received a package containing nothing but a folded American flag and a note. "Respect comes at a cost." The simplicity of it chilled her to the bone. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself it was just some internet prankster trying to scare her. Still, paranoia crept in. She double-checked her locks before bed, glanced over her shoulder when walking alone, and avoided looking directly at men in tactical gear. Deep down, she wondered if she'd gone too far. But admitting that meant admitting weakness, and Karen Thompson didn't do weakness. Halfway across the country, 6 members of Shadow Squad gathered virtually for an emergency meeting. Their encrypted video call connected them from various corners of the globe, each man seated in front of a screen displaying the same image. Karen's smug face superimposed over Mark's stoic expression. None of them spoke immediately, letting the weight of the situation settle over the room. Finally, Captain Hayes, the squad's leader, broke the silence. His voice was calm, but carried an edge of steel. "This isn't about revenge," he began, addressing the group. "It's about reminding people why we fight, why we bleed, why we die." Mark didn't ask for this. He doesn't want drama, but we owe it to him and to everyone who served to set the record straight. The others nodded grimly. Shadow Squad wasn't known for idle threats or empty gestures. They were a brotherhood forged in fire, bound by loyalty and shared sacrifice. To disrespect one of them was to disrespect all of them. And Karen Thompson had crossed a line. "What's the plan?" asked Ethan Doc Rivera, the unit's medic. His tone was measured, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of his desk. "We pay her a visit," Hayes replied. "Not to hurt her, to educate her, show her what she doesn't understand. Make her see the faces behind the uniforms." Marcus Twitch Alvarez, the team's sniper, leaned forward, his sharp eyes gleaming with intensity. "And if she doesn't listen?" Hayes allowed himself a thin smile. "Then we escalate. But let's hope it doesn't come to that." The team spent the next hour strategizing, pooling resources, and gathering intel. They pulled up satellite images of Karen's neighborhood, previewed her social media activity for patterns, and drafted contingency plans. By the end of the call, they had a clear objective: confront Karen directly, force her to confront the truth, and give her a chance to make amends. If she refused, they would escalate, but only as a last resort. As the call ended, Hayes lingered a moment longer, staring at the frozen image of Mark on his screen. He thought about the countless missions they'd survived together, the promises they'd made to honor their fallen brothers. This wasn't just about defending Mark. It was about preserving the legacy of everyone who'd ever worn the uniform. With a final glance at the screen, Hayes closed his laptop and stood up. It was time to remind the world what respect truly meant. Back in Mark's small town, life continued its relentless march forward. Fall bulleted into winter, and the streets grew quieter as frost settled over rooftops. Mark retreated further into solitude, spending most of his time tinkering with motorcycles or wandering aimlessly through the woods. He avoided the cafe entirely, unable to face the stares and whispers any longer. Yet despite his efforts to isolate himself, the past refused to let go. Every creak of the floorboards reminded him of footsteps echoing in barracks. Every gust of wind carried echoes of distant gunfire. Even the stars above seemed colder, indifferent to the pain below. But unbeknownst to Mark, help was coming. Shadow Squad was mobilizing, preparing to strike a balance between justice and compassion. They weren't just fighting for Mark. They were fighting for every soldier who'd ever been misunderstood, dismissed, or forgotten. And soon, Karen would learn exactly what it meant to underestimate them. The storm arrived without warning, a sudden tempest that swept through Karen's suburban neighborhood late one evening. Rain lashed against windows, thunder rumbled ominously, and lightning illuminated the sky in jagged streaks. Inside her modest home, Karen sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through social media updates about her latest viral post. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, each one fueling her ego. To the outside world, she appeared untouchable, confident, unyielding, invincible. But beneath the surface, unease gnawed at her. The cryptic messages hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd intensified. Early that week, she'd received another package. A dog tag engraved with the name Jake Miller and the date 7/14/2009. There was no note this time, just the cold metal resting heavily in her palm. She'd Googled the name but found nothing conclusive, only vague references to military casualties. It left her unsettled, though she refused to admit it aloud. As the storm raged outside, Karen heard a sharp knock at her front door. Startled, she glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Who would be visiting at this hour? Her heart skipped a beat as paranoia crept in. Was this some prankster retaliating for her comments? Or worse, something more sinister? She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. What she saw made her blood run cold. 6 figures stood rigidly under the porch light, their silhouettes unmistakable. Clad in tactical gear, they radiated authority and purpose. Their faces were obscured by hoods and masks, save for one man who stepped forward slightly. His eyes locked onto hers through the lens of the peephole, piercing and unyielding. He held up a laminated ID card, visible even through the distorted glass. "Open the door," his voice commanded, calm yet firm. "We're not here to hurt you." Karen hesitated, panic rising in her chest. Should she call the police, lock herself in a room? But something about their demeanor, their precision, their unity, told her resistance would be futile. Against her better judgment, she unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to peer out. "Yes," she asked, trying to sound graver than she felt. "Who are you?" The leader lowered the ID card, revealing himself fully. Beneath the hood was a middle-aged man with sharp features and an aura of quiet intensity. He introduced himself simply as Captain Hayes, omitting any mention of Shadow Squad. His tone remained polite but authoritative, leaving no room for argument. "We need to talk," he said. "May we come in?" Karen swallowed hard, torn between fear and curiosity. These men didn't look like ordinary intruders. They carried themselves with discipline, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Something about them screamed military training. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded stiffly and opened the door wider. Inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The 6 men filed in silently, their boots barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. They spread out methodically, taking positions around the living room while maintaining a respectful distance. Captain Hayes gestured for Karen to sit, which she did reluctantly, perching on the edge of her couch like a cornered animal. For several moments, no one spoke. The storm outside provided a haunting soundtrack, rain pounding against the windows as lightning flickered intermittently. Karen fidgeted nervously, clutching a throw pillow to her chest like a shield. She tried to maintain her composure, but her hands trembled visibly. Finally, Hayes broke the silence. "We're here because of Mark Reynolds," he began, his voice steady and measured. "You know him, correct?" Karen nodded hesitantly. "Yes, I met him briefly. At that coffee shop. And you posted a photo of him online," Hayes continued, his tone neutral, accusing him of disrespecting the military, mocking his service. "Is that accurate?" Her defenses flared instantly. "I wasn't mocking anyone. I was pointing out hypocrisy. Wearing a uniform isn't a fashion statement. It's earned. People need to understand that." Hayes studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached into a satchel slung over his shoulder and began laying items on her coffee table. Each object landed with a soft thud, drawing Karen's attention like magnets. First came a photograph. A group of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, grinning despite the dust and exhaustion etched on their faces. Mark stood near the center, his arm draped casually around another man's shoulders. Beneath the picture was written, "Shadow Squad, Deployment Day, Kandahar Province." Next was a helmet, its surface dented and scorched from years of combat. A bullet hole marred the side, surrounded by dry bloodstains. Hayes placed it gently beside the photo, then added a pair of dog tags, One bore Mark's name, the other read Jake Miller. Finally, he unfolded a tattered American flag, its edges frayed and faded from countless missions. As he laid it across the table, Karen felt a lump rise in her throat. She recognized these artifacts. They weren't props or costumes. They were real, tangible pieces of history soaked in sacrifice. "This is what Mark fought for," Hayes said quietly, gesturing to the display. "This is what he lost. And this is what you mocked when you called him a fraud." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but Hayes cut her off with a raised hand. "Let me tell you a story," he said, leaning forward slightly, "about Jake Miller." Over the next hour, Hayes recounted harrowing tales from Shadow Squad's deployments, each narrative more gut-wrenching than the last. He spoke of ambushes in narrow alleys, sniper fire raining down from rooftops, and the constant threat of improvised explosive devices, IEDs. He described the camaraderie forged in those moments, the bond stronger than family, and the devastation of losing teammates. When he reached Jake's story, his voice softened but never wavered. "Jake was our medic," he explained. "He saved dozens of lives during his tour, but on July 14, 2009, he didn't make it back. We were pinned down in hostile territory, outnumbered and outgunned. Jake stayed behind to cover our retreat, knowing full well he wouldn't survive." Hayes paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Karen stared at the dog tags, tears welling up in her eyes despite her best efforts to hold them back. "That jacket Mark wears," Hayes continued, "it's not just fabric, it's armor. Every patch, every stitch represents someone who gave everything so people like you could live freely. And you had the audacity to call him a liar, to accuse him of playing dress-up." Karen's face flushed with shame. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, she realized the gravity of her actions, not just toward Mark, but toward all veterans. Just when she thought the confrontation couldn't get worse, Hayes pulled out a tablet and pressed play on a video clip. It showed Karen's interview looped on repeat, juxtaposed with footage of soldiers in action, crawling through mud, carrying wounded comrades, shielding civilians from danger. The contrast was jarring, forcing her to confront the stark disparity between her complaints and the realities of war. "You have a platform," Hayes said finally, switching off the screen. "Use it wisely, apologize to Mark publicly, and commit to educating others about the sacrifices made by our troops. Fail to do so, and we'll ensure the world sees exactly who you are and what you've done." Karen nodded numbly, too overwhelmed to speak. As the men gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, Hayes handed her the folded flag. "Respect costs nothing," he said softly, "but earning it means everything." With that, Shadow Squad vanished into the storm, leaving Karen alone with her thoughts and the ghosts of wars she'd never truly understood. The days following Shadow Squad's visit were a blur for Karen Thompson. Sleep eluded her entirely. Every time she closed her eyes, images of dog tags, helmets, and blood-soaked flags haunted her dreams. Her once brimming confidence had crumbled into shards of guilt and fear. The men hadn't raised their voices, hadn't threatened her physically, but their presence alone had been enough to shatter her carefully constructed facade of invincibility. Karen spent hours staring at the folded American flag Captain Hayes had left behind, its faded fabric whispering truths she never wanted to hear. She replayed his words in her mind. "Respect costs nothing, but earning it means everything." What did that even mean? How could she possibly earn back the respect she'd so carelessly trampled? Her first instinct was denial. Surely this was just some elaborate prank designed to scare her straight. Maybe these men weren't really veterans. They couldn't be, right? But deep down, Karen knew better. Their precision, their discipline, their unwavering commitment to honor, it all screamed authenticity. And the artifacts they brought, the helmet, the dog tags, the photographs, were too real to dismiss as props. For the first time in years, Karen felt truly powerless. The same internet that had elevated her to viral fame now loomed over her like a guillotine. One wrong move, one misstep, and Shadow Squad's threat would come true. The world would see her for who she really was, an ignorant provocateur who'd mocked the very people she claimed to defend. But what choice did she have? Ignoring them wasn't an option. They'd made that abundantly clear. Reluctantly, Karen reached out to Captain Hayes through the anonymous email address he provided. To her surprise, he responded within minutes, his tone curt but not unkind. "You've got two options," he wrote. "Publicly apologize to Mark Reynolds and work to repair the damage you caused, or face the consequences. Your call." His words sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her veins. Public apology? That meant admitting fault, not just privately, but to millions of people who cheered her on. It meant dismantling the persona she'd spent years building. Could she really do that? And yet, what other path was there? The alternative, a smear campaign exposing her ignorance and arrogance, terrified her more than anything. For all her bravado, Karen craved validation. Losing her audience would leave her hollow, a shell of who she used to be. After hours of agonizing deliberation, Karen typed out a draft of her apology. It was clumsy and awkward at first, riddled with defensive justifications. But as she rewrote it again and again, something shifted. The memories of Hayes' stories crept into her mind. The soldiers crawling through mud, the medic sacrificing himself, the flag carried through battlefields. Slowly, painfully, Karen began to understand the weight of her actions. By the time she hit send on her final draft, tears streamed down her face. For the first time in her life, Karen Thompson admitted she'd been wrong and vowed to make amends. Mark received Karen's message with mixed emotions. He'd retreated further into solitude since the incident, avoiding social media and public spaces altogether. The wounds inflicted by her words still festered, raw and unhealed. When her email popped up on his screen, he almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. Her apology was sincere, if somewhat faltering. She acknowledged her ignorance, expressed regret for her behavior, and asked, tentatively, if they could meet in person to discuss next steps. Mark read the message twice, then set his phone aside, staring blankly at the wall. Could he forgive her? Should he? Part of him wanted to let go of the anger festering inside, to find peace after weeks of torment. But another part, a darker, angrier part, resented her intrusion. Why should he give her absolution when she hadn't earned it? For days, Mark wrestled with the decision. He sought solace in routine, fixing motorcycles and wandering the woods near his home. At night, he sat alone in his garage, tracing the patches on his jacket with trembling fingers. Each one reminded him of sacrifices made, promises broken, and battles fought, not just overseas, but here at home, against ignorance and indifference. Finally, after much deliberation, Mark replied, a single sentence, meet me tomorrow at Hillcrest Park, noon. Hillcrest Park was quiet on the appointed day, its sprawling lawns dotted with families enjoying the crisp autumn air. Leaves crunched underfoot as Mark approached the memorial plaque dedicated to local veterans. He stood silently before it, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his camo jacket. Despite the chill, he refused to wear anything else. This was his armor, his shield, and today it was also his olive branch. Karen arrived 5 minutes late, her heels clicking nervously against the paved path. She spotted Mark immediately, his tall frame unmistakable against the backdrop of golden trees. As she drew closer, her steps slowed, uncertainty etched across her face. Hi, she said softly, stopping a few feet away. Thanks for agreeing to meet me. Mark nodded once, his expression unreadable. You wanted to talk. Karen hesitated, searching his eyes for any trace of warmth. Finding none, she took a deep breath and plunged ahead. I owe you an apology for everything. I didn't understand what your jacket meant to you, or the sacrifices it represents. I acted out of ignorance, not malice, and I'm sorry. Her voice cracked on the last word, tears pooling in her eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of fallen leaves. I believe you, Mark said finally, his tone measured. But believing you doesn't erase what happened. You hurt me, Karen. You hurt a lot of people. She nodded vehemently, wiping at her cheeks. I know. I didn't realize how much power my words had, or how much harm they could cause. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. Mark studied her carefully, weighing her sincerity against his lingering resentment. Finally, he sighed and gestured to the bench beside the memorial. Sit. They talked for nearly an hour, their conversation halting at first, but gradually growing more fluid. Karen shared her fears about losing her platform, her desperation to maintain relevance in a crowded digital landscape. Mark listened patiently, offering insights into his own struggles with PTSD and isolation. In turn, he recounted stories from his deployments, painting vivid pictures of camaraderie and loss. At one point, Karen blurted out, "Why didn't you say something sooner? During our argument, I mean, if you'd explain." "I shouldn't have to explain," Mark interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "Not to you, not to anyone. My service speaks for itself. But you're right. I could have handled it differently. We both made mistakes." The admission startled Karen. She hadn't expected him to shoulder any blame. So, where does that leave us? Mark leaned back, staring at the memorial plaque thoughtfully. It leaves you with a choice. You can walk away, pretend this never happened, and keep living the way you always have. Or you can use your platform to educate others, to remind people of the sacrifices made by those who serve. It's not about me anymore. It's about them. Karen swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I want to help. Really, I do. But I don't even know where to start. A ghost of a smile flickered across Mark's face. Start small. Share their stories. Amplify their voices. Let them teach you what you need to learn. Over the next few weeks, Karen threw herself into her newfound mission with surprising zeal. She began producing content featuring interviews with veterans, shedding light on issues like PTSD, unemployment, and homelessness among former soldiers. Her followers were initially skeptical, accusing her of performative activism. But as her posts grew more authentic, more heartfelt, they started listening. One particularly impactful video featured Mark sharing his experiences with combat trauma and civilian reintegration. Sitting in his garage surrounded by tools and motorcycle parts, he spoke candidly about the challenges of adjusting to life after service. The video went viral, garnering millions of views and sparking conversations worldwide. For Mark, the experience was cathartic. Opening up about his struggles helped him process old wounds while connecting with others facing similar battles. He found purpose in mentoring young veterans, guiding them through the transition back to civilian life. Together, he and Karen formed an unlikely partnership, using their combined influence to advocate for meaningful change. Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. There were moments when Mark questioned whether Karen's transformation was genuine or merely strategic, and Karen, for her part, struggled to reconcile her past self with the person she was becoming. But progress, no matter how incremental, was progress nonetheless. The climax of their journey occurred during a charity event hosted by Karen. Hundreds of veterans gathered to share their stories, celebrate their resilience, and honor those who hadn't made it home. Among them was Mark, standing proudly beside his brothers in arms, his jacket gleaming in the sunlight. As the ceremony concluded, Karen approached him, holding out a patch she'd commissioned specifically for the occasion. Embroidered on it were the words, "Respect earned, never forgotten." "For you," she said simply, pressing it into his hand. Mark examined it carefully, a rare smile breaking through his stoic exterior. "Thank you," he murmured, pinning it to his jacket. "This means more than you know." In that moment, the rift between them began to heal, not fully, perhaps, but enough to forge a fragile bridge. Redemption, they realized, was a shared endeavor. One step at a time, one story at a time, they walked the line between accountability and grace. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Shadow Squad watched silently, ensuring the lessons learned would endure long after the storm passed. Months had passed since that fateful day at Hillcrest Park, but the ripple effects of Karen's apology and Mark's forgiveness continued to shape their lives in profound ways. The world around them seemed unchanged at first glance. People still scrolled through social media feeds, sipping lattes and debating politics, but beneath the surface something remarkable was happening. A conversation that began with anger and misunderstanding had blossomed into a movement, one fueled by empathy, education, and action. For Karen Thompson, the transformation was nothing short of seismic. Gone was the brash influencer who thrived on controversy for clicks. In her place stood a woman humbled by her mistakes, determined to use her platform for good. Her newfound mission became clear: to amplify the voices of those who served, ensuring their sacrifices were never forgotten or trivialized again. Every morning, Karen woke up with a sense of purpose she'd never known before. She started her days by scrolling through messages from veterans sharing their stories, some triumphant, others heartbreakingly raw. Each one reminded her of how much work remained to be done. Inspired by these narratives, she launched a series called Beyond the Uniform, where she interviewed veterans about their experiences, challenges, and triumphs. The episodes ranged from intimate discussions about mental health to practical advice on navigating civilian life. Her audience responded with overwhelming support. Followers who once dismissed her as self-serving now praised her authenticity and dedication. Veterans reached out to thank her for giving them a voice, while civilians expressed gratitude for learning perspectives they'd never considered. For the first time, Karen felt like she was making a real difference, not just racking up views, but fostering understanding. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Critics still lingered, accusing her of exploiting veterans for clout or insincerely cashing in on redemption. Some even questioned whether her change of heart was genuine, pointing to her past behavior as evidence of hypocrisy. These accusations stung, but Karen refused to let them derail her progress. Instead, she leaned into transparency, openly acknowledging her flaws and committing to continuous growth. One evening during a live stream, she addressed her detractors directly. "I'm not perfect," she admitted, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "I've made mistakes, big ones, and I'll probably make more in the future. But what I can promise you is this: I'm listening, I'm learning, and I won't stop until we create a world where veterans are truly seen, heard, and respected." The comment section flooded with supportive messages, many from veterans themselves. One particularly poignant reply read, "You don't have to be perfect to make a difference. Just keep showing up." Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds found solace in unexpected places. His partnership with Karen had opened doors he never imagined possible. Together, they co-founded a nonprofit organization called Shadow Legacy. dedicated to supporting veterans transitioning to civilian life. Named in honor of Shadow Squad, the brothers in arms who'd stepped in when Mark needed them most. The initiative quickly gained traction, drawing volunteers, donors, and advocates from across the country. Mark poured his energy into mentoring young veterans, guiding them through the often tumultuous process of reintegrating into society. He organized workshops on job skills, financial literacy, and mental health resources, ensuring no one felt lost or alone. On weekends, he hosted group rides for fellow motorcycle enthusiasts, creating a safe space for camaraderie and connection. Through it all, Mark carried his jacket everywhere he went, a symbol not just of his service, but of resilience and hope. The patches told stories of battles fought and lives touched, each one a reminder of why he kept pushing forward. When newcomers asked about its significance, he shared freely, using it as a teaching moment to educate others about military culture and sacrifice. "You see this patch?" he'd say, pointing to the black ribbon honoring Jake Miller. "This isn't just fabric. It's a promise to remember, to honor, to carry the torch." That's what respect looks like. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local news outlets featured him in profiles highlighting his advocacy work, calling him a beacon of hope for struggling veterans. Strangers approached him in public to shake his hand or thank him for his service, their eyes shining with admiration. Though Mark remained humble, deflecting praise whenever possible, he couldn't deny the warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt whole again. As summer gave way to autumn, Karen and Mark collaborated on their biggest project yet, a nationwide awareness campaign titled Respect Earned. The initiative combines storytelling, art installations, and community events to celebrate veterans' contributions while addressing systemic issues affecting their well-being. At its heart was a traveling memorial wall adorned with photos, letters, and mementos submitted by families of fallen soldiers. Visitors could leave tributes or share their own reflections, creating a living testament to sacrifice and solidarity. The campaign culminated in a massive charity gala held at a historic venue in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of attendees gathered under glittering chandeliers, mingling among displays of military artifacts and personal memorabilia. Speakers included decorated veterans, policymakers, and celebrities lending their voices to the cause. Karen delivered an impassioned speech that brought the crowd to its feet, while Mark received a standing ovation after sharing a heartfelt tribute to his fallen comrades. Among the guests was Captain Hayes and several members of Shadow Squad, their presence unspoken but deeply felt. They watched from the shadows, nodding approvingly as Karen and Mark took the stage together to unveil the centerpiece of the evening, a towering sculpture depicting a soldier kneeling beside a folded flag. Etched into the base were the words, "To those who served, we owe everything." As applause filled the room, Karen turned to Mark with tears in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "Against all odds, we actually did it." Mark smiled faintly, his gaze fixed on the sculpture. "Not us," he corrected gently. "Them, all of them." In the weeks that followed, Karen visited a military cemetery alone, seeking closure. Rows upon rows of white headstones stretched endlessly before her, each one bearing the name of someone who'd given everything. She wandered aimlessly until she found a grave marked simply, "Unknown Soldier." Kneeling beside it, she placed a bouquet of flowers and bowed her head in silent reverence. Unbeknownst to her, a figure watched from afar. Captain Hayes stood among the trees, his silhouette blending seamlessly with the shadows. He didn't approach, didn't speak. His presence was enough. As Karen rose to leave, she glanced over her shoulder, sensing something intangible yet undeniable. A chill ran down her spine, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude. Back home, Mark sat on his porch, gazing at the stars. His jacket lay draped over the railing, patches glinting softly in the moonlight. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, not of battles fought, but of bridges built, of wounds healed, of futures forged from ashes. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the ghosts of wars past whispered their approval.